My dear friend, there's a message burning in my spirit today, a message that feels less like a thought and more like a stirring from heaven itself. A message for the weary, the overwhelmed, the ones who are trying so hard to hold themselves together while life keeps placing more weight on their shoulders. A message for you who has been praying in whispers and hoping in silence. You may not realize it, but heaven has been leaning in your direction, and today that whisper becomes a declaration. To the one who is tired, to the one who is burdened, to the one who is doing everything you can just to stay afloat, listen closely. God never intended for you to carry the weight that only He is equipped to bear. He never asked you to drag the burdens that break your back. He never formed you in your mother's womb, so you could spend your life fighting battles that belong to Him. When He breathed life into your lungs, He didn't do it so you could suffocate under the pressure of trying to control outcomes you were never designed to control. There is a deeper truth, a truth that can free your soul from the chains of anxiety and the paralysis of fear, if you will let it take root inside you. Simply be. Let God take care of the rest. Let that reality rattle your bones. Let it move through your spirit like a cleansing fire. Because somewhere along the journey of life, you convinced yourself that you had to fix everything. You assumed the role of hero in every crisis, caretaker of every problem, manager of every unseen detail. You believed the lie that peace comes from control, when in reality, peace comes from surrender. You were never assigned to be your own savior. You were never expected to solve every problem. You were never meant to carry the weight of tomorrow on your shoulders today. There are nights, and you know them well, where the world is quiet, but your mind is loud. Where you lie awake staring at the ceiling, whispering into the darkness, "Lord, what more can I possibly do?" And in those moments, heaven doesn't respond with instructions for more striving. Heaven responds with an invitation not to fight harder, but to let go deeper. Not with more striving, but more surrender. Not with more panic, but more praise. Not with more control, but more trust, because trust transforms everything. Trust is not passive. Trust is not weakness. Trust is not giving up. Trust is placing the weight of your life into the hands of the one who has already written your story from beginning to end. The one who sees what you cannot. The one who knows what you do not. The one who has already worked out what you're still worrying about. Be still, not weak still, not idle still. Still in the peace that comes from knowing that God is already in the places your feet have not yet stepped. Still in the confidence that He is fighting battles you don't even know exist. Still in the awareness that His timing is perfect. His wisdom is flawless, and His plan is beyond anything your mind could construct. Be still in the quiet where God's voice becomes louder than your fear. Be still in the moments when your heart trembles and His presence steadies you. Be still not because life is easy, but because God is faithful. This stillness is not emptiness, it is alignment. It is the moment where heaven's power becomes stronger than earth's pressure. It is the space where God reminds you, "My child, you were never meant to carry this alone." When you stop clutching your problems with white-knuckled fists, when you loosen your grip on the things you cannot control, when you open your hands and say, "Lord, this is yours, that is the moment everything begins to shift, because God cannot fill hands that are already full. God cannot lift what you refuse to let go of. God cannot carry what you continue to claim as your responsibility. He is not asking you to give up. He is asking you to give it over. Your worry does not move God, your trust does. Your fear does not activate heaven, your faith does. Your anxiety does not open doors, your surrender does. And the moment you choose trust, real trust, deep trust, the kind that springs from your spirit even when your circumstances look impossible, that is the moment God begins to reveal what He's been preparing behind the scenes. You don't have to understand the plan. You don't have to see the full path. You just have to trust the one guiding your steps. And as you breathe in the quiet of this moment, something begins to shift deep within you and not around you, not in your circumstances, but in the chamber of your spirit where true transformation begins, because that's where God does His greatest work, not in the noise, not in the chaos, not in the frantic motion of a mind trying to outrun fear, but in the stillness, in the surrender, in the place where you finally whisper, "Lord, I need you." You see, there is a sacred transition that takes place when you move from striving to trusting. When you stop relying on your own limited understanding and step into the limitless grace of the one who sees the end from the beginning. And that transition is not weakness, it is wisdom, it is strength. It is the very posture that heaven responds to. Because the truth is, God never asked you to be strong enough. He only asked you to be willing enough, willing to trust Him, willing to lean on Him, willing to give Him access to the parts of your heart you've been trying to hold together on your own. Think about it. If God could speak light into the darkness, if He could calm storms with a single word, if He could raise up leaders from dust and destiny from ashes, if He could guide Noah, strengthen Moses, steady David, and lift Mary, if He could part seas and open prison doors and heal the broken with a touch, what makes you think He cannot handle what you're facing? Your problem is not bigger than His promise. Your fear is not stronger than His faithfulness. Your confusion is not deeper than His wisdom. Your mountain is not taller than His strength. But sometimes God has to let your plans fall apart so your faith can fall into place. Sometimes He has to remove what you were clinging to so you can finally cling to Him. Sometimes He has to allow the storm to rise so you remember who your anchor truly is. Worry convinces you that everything depends on you. Trust reminds you that everything depends on God. Worry chokes your spirit. Trust breathes life into your soul. Worry drains your strength. Trust restores your power. Worry blinds you to possibility. Trust opens your eyes to divine perspective. And when you choose trust, real trust, the kind that forms in the fire, you begin to see something extraordinary, that God is not late. He is not absent. He is not silent. He is working in ways your human eyes cannot detect. He is moving pieces you don't even know exist. He is aligning moments, shifting hearts, opening doors, and preparing answers long before you ever ask. Just because you cannot see progress does not mean God is not producing it. A seed does its greatest growing underground, hidden from sight. A foundation is built long before the walls rise. The sunrise is prepared in the darkness before dawn. And in the same way, God is building something within you, something strong, something unshakable, something eternal, long before you see the results. Your job is not to understand how. Your job is not to predict when. Your job is not to orchestrate every detail. Your job is to trust that God is who He says He is, to trust that His promises never fail, to trust that He is closer than your breath and stronger than your fear, to trust that He is fighting battles you never even knew were aimed at you, to trust that He is making a way where you cannot see one, Because the moment you let go and let God, that is the moment heaven takes over. And when heaven moves, everything changes. The burdens that once felt unliftable begin to lighten. The fears that once felt overwhelming begin to shrink. The confusion that once clouded your mind begins to clear. The pressure that once crushed your spirit begins to dissolve. Not because the circumstances suddenly vanish, but because the presence of God becomes greater than the weight of the world pressing against you. Every time you surrender, you shift the battle from your hands to His. Every time you trust, you invite His power into your situation. Every time you release control, you position your life under His authority. And under His authority, nothing can defeat you. You may still face storms, but you won't drown. You may still walk through valleys, but you won't fall. You may still fight battles, but you will not fight them alone. Because the God who formed you, the God who called you, the God who leads you, the God who loves you, is also the God who carries you. So, stop worrying, stop overthinking, stop trying to hold everything together by yourself. Let God handle it. He is far better at being God than you are. And when you release the burden, your spirit will rise. And as your spirit rises, something remarkable begins to take shape, not in the world around you, but in the world within you. The very atmosphere of your soul starts to shift. The tension loosens, the noise quiets, the shadows retreat. Because when trust enters, fear has no choice but to exit. When faith awakens, doubt loses its authority. When God steps into the center of your heart, everything that once overwhelmed you begins to lose its power. This is the divine exchange heaven has been waiting for you to make. Your worry for His wisdom, your pressure for His peace, your striving for His strength. And once that exchange begins, you start to remember something essential, something ancient, eternal, and unshakable. You were never meant to walk this life alone. Not for a single moment, not for a single breath. Before your first tear ever fell, God counted it. Before your first fear ever surfaced, He saw it. Before your first wound ever formed, He planned the healing. That is the depth of His care. That is the magnitude of His love. You may feel forgotten, but He has carved your name into the very palm of His hand. You may feel abandoned, but He has promised, I will never leave you nor forsake you. You may feel unseen, but He watches over you more carefully than the sparrow or the lily. You may feel directionless, but He guides your steps with a wisdom older than time itself. And yet, in the midst of all this, there remains a question heaven asks of you again and again. Will you trust me, not half-heartedly, not momentarily, not when it's convenient, but fully, completely, relentlessly, because trust is not a feeling, it's a decision. A decision to believe God's voice over your fears. A decision to lean into His promises instead of your panic. A decision to step into faith even when the path is hidden. Think of Abraham standing beneath a silent sky, asked to believe in a promise he could not see. Think of Joseph, betrayed and forgotten, yet held in the palm of God's purpose. Think of Esther, trembling before a king, but strengthened by a calling. Think of David, facing giants with nothing but a sling and a certainty that God was with him. None of them had the full picture. None of them knew how it would turn out. None of them felt ready, but every one of them trusted, and because they trusted, God moved. He opened seas. He shut lions' mouths. He multiplied loaves. He raised the dead. He turned weakness into victory and impossibility into testimony. And the same God who moved for them still moves for you. This is why He asks for your trust, not because He needs it, but because you do. You need the freedom that comes from letting go. You need the peace that comes from surrender. You need the strength that flows from admitting, Lord, I cannot do this without you. For as long as you cling to control, fear will cling to you. But the moment you release control, heaven's power begins to flow into your life like a river. And slowly, quietly, unmistakably, you begin to notice something. You're not as afraid anymore. Your heart isn't as heavy. Your mind isn't as loud. Your steps aren't as uncertain. Because the God who carries galaxies in his hands is now carrying you. You begin to see life differently, not through the lens of anxiety, but through the lens of purpose. Not through the fog of fear, but through the clarity of faith. Problems lose their sting. Setbacks lose their bite. What once intimidated you now inspires you. What once drained you now shapes you. Because when you trust God, life doesn't become easier. You become stronger. You become resilient. You become grounded. You become steady in storms and anchored in chaos. You become the kind of person who can stand in the middle of uncertainty and still say, God is with me. I will not fear. And it's in that strength, not your own, but his within you, that you begin to rise into the life he intended for you all along. A life guided by peace, not panic, purpose, not pressure, faith, not fear. A life where you don't just survive, you grow. You learn, you stretch, you awaken, you become. For the same God who formed the universe is forming something within you, something eternal, something powerful, something unstoppable. And all he asks is that you trust him long enough to see it unfold. And as this trust deepens, you begin to understand something profound, something that changes not just how you walk through life, but who you become in the process. You start to see that every challenge was shaping you, every delay was strengthening you, every burden was preparing you, and every unanswered question was guiding you closer to the heart of God. What felt like abandonment was actually alignment. What appeared to be silence was strategic preparation. What seemed like an ending was the quiet beginning of something far greater than you imagined. Because God doesn't just work around you, he works within you. He cultivates patience in the soil of frustration. He grows faith in seasons of drought. He builds character through the weight of responsibility. He sharpens purpose in the fire of adversity. You may not have seen it, but he was there in every moment. In every tear, in every disappointment, in every late night prayer whispered into the darkness, he heard you. He held you. And even when you felt like you were walking alone, God was carrying you through the very valley that threatened to break you. This is why trust matters so deeply, because trust doesn't change God, it changes you. It shifts your posture. It turns fear into faith, anxiety into assurance, and confusion into confidence. When you trust him, you stop striving for control and start stepping into purpose. You stop panicking about outcomes and start believing in divine timing. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin declaring, God is preparing something in me. The greatest transformations in life don't happen in moments of comfort. They happen in moments of surrender. Moments when your strength runs out and his strength flows in. Moments when your plans fall apart so his can fall into place. Moments when you loosen your grip long enough for heaven to take hold of your heart. And as that surrender deepens, you discover that God's plan for your life has always been bigger than your fear, wider than your limitations, and stronger than your doubts. His plan is not fragile. His promise is not uncertain. His purpose is not dependent on your perfect performance. He knew your flaws before he called you. He understood your weaknesses before he chose you. He saw your failures before he loved you. Yet still he chose you. Still he called you. Still he anointed you. Still he appointed you. Not because you are perfect, but because he is. And you must understand this. Trusting God doesn't mean ignoring your problems. It means placing them into hands capable of carrying what you cannot. It means saying, Lord, this is too big for me, but never too big for you. It means recognizing that while you fight battles on the ground, heaven is fighting battles you cannot see. Think of Moses standing before the Red Sea, the enemy closing in behind him. To the world, it looked like a dead end. But to God, it was the birthplace of a miracle. Think of Daniel in the lion's den. To the world, it looked like punishment. But to God, it was a platform to reveal his power. Think of Paul in prison, chained and confined. To the world, it looked like defeat. But to God, it was a stage to write letters that would outlive empires. In every story, the situation looked hopeless until God stepped in. And when he steps in, everything changes. Your Red Sea parts, your lions' mouths close, your chains break. Your prison becomes your platform. Your setback becomes your setup. This is the nature of the God you trust, a God who specializes in the impossible. A God who moves mountains with whispers and calms storms with a single word. A God who sees beyond what your eyes can imagine and works beyond what your mind can comprehend. A God who never stops, never sleeps, never forgets, and never fails. So when he says, "Be still," it is not an invitation to inactivity. It is an invitation to divine alignment. It is God saying, "Let me work, let me lead, let me fight this battle on your behalf." It is God reminding you that rest is not weakness, rest is worship. Surrender is not defeat, surrender is strategy. Letting go is not giving up, letting go is allowing God to take over. And the moment you choose trust over turmoil, heaven releases peace that does not make sense. A calm that rises above circumstances. A strength that carries you through the fire without the smell of smoke. A courage that defies logic. A clarity that cuts through confusion like light through darkness. This is what happens when God takes the weight from your shoulders. You begin to stand taller, breathe deeper, live freer, and walk lighter. You begin to move with purpose instead of pressure. You begin to respond with faith instead of fear. You begin to see your life not as a series of random events, but as a beautifully orchestrated symphony composed by the one who knows the end from the beginning. And in that revelation, something powerful shifts within you. You realize you are no longer the victim of your circumstances. You are the vessel of God's purpose. You realize you are not being crushed. You are being crafted. You realize you are not falling apart. You are falling into place. You realize you are not alone. You are aligned with the Creator of heaven and earth. And when that truth finally reaches the deepest places of your spirit, you begin to breathe differently. You begin to walk differently. You begin to carry yourself with a quiet confidence that doesn't come from arrogance, but the assurance that God is leading you, God is holding you, God is fighting for you, and God is shaping you into someone stronger than the storms you've gone through. Someone wiser than the wounds you've endured. Someone more grounded than the battles that once shook you. This is what trust does. It doesn't eliminate the storm, it anchors you through it. It doesn't wipe away the valley, it walks with you in the shadow. It doesn't erase the burden, It transforms the burden into breakthrough. Because the God who calls you to trust him also equips you to rise, not in your strength in his, not in your wisdom in his, not in your power in his. When you finally stop trying to control every outcome, you create room for God to exceed your expectations. When you stop forcing solutions, he reveals better ones. When you stop clinging to plans that are breaking you, he replaces them with plans that will bless you. When you stop striving in your own strength, his strength becomes your foundation. This is why Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Not more pressure, not more weight, not more expectations. Rest. The kind of rest that heals the heart. The kind that untangles the mind. The kind that frees the soul. The kind that reminds you that God is not just your creator, he is your sustainer. And the remarkable thing is this: the more you trust him, the clearer life becomes. What once felt chaotic becomes purposeful. What once felt heavy becomes holy. The situations you blamed become the very situations that shaped you. The people who hurt you become the teachers who refined you. The moments you feared become the moments you later thank God for, because without them you would have never discovered who you were meant to become. Look back at your life for a moment, not with judgment, but with clarity. Think of the mountains you climbed that you once thought were impossible. Think of the storms you survived that you thought would break you. Think of the prayers God answered in ways you never expected. Think of the doors that shut, the doors that opened, and the paths that redirected you into blessings you didn't even know you needed. Now imagine how different life could feel if you trusted God in the present the same way you see his faithfulness in the past. He has never failed you, not once, not ever. Even in the moments that felt like failure, he was protecting you from something you didn't see. Even in the seasons that felt like silence, he was preparing something you weren't ready for. Even in the chapters that felt like endings, he was writing a beginning greater than you imagined. This is the God you are learning to trust, the God who bends time, the God who heals hearts, the God who restores what was lost, the God who turns ashes into beauty and brokenness into destiny, the God who whispers peace into storms and purpose into suffering, the God who knows exactly what he is doing even when you don't. And there is something liberating about finally reaching the place where you can say, "Lord, I don't have to understand everything. I just have to trust you." Because trust frees you from the prison of overthinking. Trust frees you from the weight of trying to carry what you were never designed to carry. Trust frees you from the illusion that you must solve every problem. Trust frees you from the fear of uncertainty. For once you place your life fully in God's hands, you discover something beautiful. His hands are steady. His hands are strong. His hands are gentle, and his hands have never dropped anything he has chosen to hold. So let your heart rest. Let your spirit breathe. Let your mind loosen its grip. Let your soul exhale. For God is not just aware of your situation. He is actively involved in it. He is orchestrating details you cannot see. He is aligning answers that have not yet reached you. He is preparing breakthroughs that will unfold in their perfect season. He is carving paths in places that once looked impassable, and all he asks of you is trust. Trust when it's confusing. Trust when it's painful. Trust when it's quiet. Trust when it feels slow. Trust when doors close. Trust when dreams delay. Trust when you feel unqualified. Trust when life feels heavier than your heart can hold. Because trust is not based on how you feel, It's based on who God is. And He is faithful. He is present. He is sovereign. He is working. He is good, always good, even when life is not. And as this truth settles into the deepest chambers of your being, you begin to understand something life-changing. Trusting God is not passive. It is not weak. It is not resignation. It is the most powerful spiritual posture a human soul can take. Because when you trust God, you are not giving up, you are rising up. You are stepping into a dimension of strength not born from this world. You are aligning yourself with the very power that commands galaxies, governs seasons, and holds eternity together. Trust is not sitting still. Trust is standing firm. Trust is not doing nothing. Trust is doing the right thing, surrendering. Trust is not losing control. It is placing control into hands far more capable than yours. And when this shift happens within you, you begin to walk with a different energy, an energy that can only come from heaven. Your confidence no longer depends on circumstances. Your peace no longer depends on results. Your hope no longer depends on timelines. You become anchored, rooted, grounded in something unshakable, the character of God Himself. This is why Scripture never said, "Understand the Lord with all your heart." It said, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." Because your understanding is limited, but His wisdom is limitless. Your sight is narrow, but His vision spans eternity. Your plans are fragile, but His purposes cannot fail. And if you listen closely, you will notice how God speaks to your heart in different seasons. Sometimes He speaks loudly, like thunder in a storm, directing you with clarity. Sometimes He speaks gently, like a whisper in the wind, guiding you with peace. Sometimes He speaks through closed doors. Sometimes through unexpected blessings. Sometimes through people. Sometimes through silence. But always, always, He speaks with intention. You may not always recognize it in the moment, but every delay, every detour, every redirection carries divine purpose. Nothing in your life is wasted when God is in control. Not the tears, not the trials, not the heartbreaks, not the questions. All of it is woven into a story greater than your pain and bigger than your dreams. Think of Joseph thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, imprisoned unjustly. Every step looked like tragedy. Every chapter looked like betrayal. Every moment looked like loss. But God was not writing a story of defeat. He was preparing Joseph to sit beside kings. Think of Ruth, widowed and wandering, her heart shattered, her future uncertain, her life uprooted. But God turned her pain into a lineage that would lead to King David and eventually to Jesus Himself. Think of Job, stripped of everything he loved, his body broken, his heart crushed, his world collapsed. Yet in the ashes of despair, God restored double what was lost. These stories teach you something eternal. God's silence never means God's absence. God's delay never means God's denial. God's mystery never means God's mistake. He is always moving, always orchestrating, always aligning, always working, even when your eyes see nothing. And so the question becomes, will you believe what you feel, or will you believe what God has spoken? Will you trust your anxiety or trust His promise? Will you cling to your fear or cling to His faithfulness? Because the deeper your trust grows, the more your perspective shifts. You begin to stop reacting from panic and start responding from peace. You begin to see obstacles as opportunities. You begin to see delays as protection. You begin to see hardship as preparation. You begin to see that what you thought was falling apart is actually falling into alignment. And slowly, something incredible happens. Your relationship with God shifts from routine to reliance. Prayer stops being a ritual and becomes a lifeline. Worship stops being a moment and becomes a lifestyle. Faith stops being something you try and becomes something you breathe. Because trust transforms your entire spiritual DNA. It shapes your thoughts, it shapes your emotions, it shapes your decisions, it shapes your destiny. And once you reach this level of trust, fear begins to lose its grip. Worry loosens its claws. Doubt fades like mist under the rising sun. Because when God becomes your anchor, storms no longer intimidate you, they activate you. They remind you who holds you. They remind you who protects you. They remind you who covers you. They remind you who fights for you. You begin to walk into each day not with dread but expectancy, not with anxiety but assurance, not with fear but faith, because you know deep in your bones that God is in control, not sometimes, not occasionally, not only when life feels easy, but always, through every valley, through every disappointment, through every unanswered question, through every season of waiting, through every moment that feels bigger than you. God is there, God is present, God is working, God is guiding. God is holding you with hands that have never failed. And as this presence of God becomes more real to you, more alive in you, more tangible in your everyday steps, you begin to experience something rare in this world, a peace that defies logic, a peace that doesn't waver when circumstances shift, a peace that doesn't crumble when people disappoint you, a peace that doesn't break when life throws storms, trials, and unexpected turns your way. This is not the peace the world gives. This is the peace that comes from knowing your life is held by a God who has never once lost control. And in that peace, your spirit begins to awaken to purpose, awaken to calling, awaken to identity, awaken to truth, the truth that you were created intentionally, not accidentally, the truth that you were set apart, not overlooked, the truth that you carry a purpose uniquely designed, not randomly assigned, the truth that your journey, every triumph, every tear, every hidden chapter, has been shaping you for something extraordinary. Because when you trust God deeply, He doesn't just carry your burdens, He reveals your destiny. He shows you why the battle was necessary. He shows you why the waiting was essential. He shows you why the pruning was part of the process. He shows you why certain people could not go where He was taking you. He shows you that nothing was wasted, not one tear, not one heartbreak, not one closed door, not one night you felt alone. Every piece was making you stronger, wiser, and more prepared for the life He destined you to walk into. You see, God does not develop warriors in comfort, He develops warriors in fire. He does not build leaders in ease, He builds leaders in storms. He does not shape champions in calm, He shapes them in challenges. The very weight you tried to escape was the weight that built you. The very pressure you resented was the pressure that refined you. The very battle you begged God to remove was the battle that taught you how to fight. And now you see, you were never being punished, you were being prepared. You were never being abandoned, you were being aligned. You were never losing, you were learning. You were never falling apart, you were falling upward into God's design. This is the transformation that happens when you shift from worry to worship, from control to surrender, from fear to trust. Your spirit grows, your vision expands, your mind clears, your heart steadies, your faith strengthens, and suddenly you begin to realize The things that once scared you no longer have power over you. The situations that once overwhelmed you no longer control your peace. The voices that once tore you down no longer dictate your worth. The failures that once defined you no longer determine your future. Because trusting God changes your identity, you no longer see yourself through the lens of fear. You see yourself through the lens of faith. You no longer define yourself by past mistakes. You define yourself by God's grace. You no longer walk as a slave to anxiety. You walk as a child of the King. And children of the King do not walk in fear. They walk in confidence. They walk in authority. They walk in purpose. They walk in trust. Trust that God's timing is perfect. Trust that His provision is guaranteed. Trust that His plan is sovereign. Trust that His love is unfailing. And this trust doesn't just transform your inner world. It transforms the way you live. You begin to make decisions based not on fear of the unknown, but on faith in the One who knows all things. You begin to pursue dreams not out of desperation, but out of destiny. You begin to walk into opportunities with courage, not caution. You begin to love people more deeply because you are no longer drained by fear. You begin to give more freely because your security no longer comes from what you have, but who holds you. Even the way you pray changes. Your prayers shift from "Lord, fix this," to "Lord, strengthen me," from "Lord, remove this," to "Lord, use this," from "Lord, why me?" to "Lord, help me trust you through this." This is spiritual maturity, not memorizing scripture, but living it. Not knowing God's promises, but standing on them. Not singing about faith, but walking in it. And as you walk in this trust, God opens doors that no man can shut. He brings clarity to decisions that kept you confused. He aligns connections that elevate your calling. He restores things you thought were permanently lost. He breathes life into dreams you buried long ago. He brings purpose out of pain, beauty out of ashes, strength out of struggle. This is what happens when you let God handle what only He can handle. When you stop gripping life with clenched fists and open your hands to heaven. When you stop fighting battles that were never yours to fight and let God be God. When you stop letting fear write your story and let faith take the pen. Trust is not just a posture, it is a revolution within the soul. And as this revolution takes root within you, something remarkable begins to happen. Not loudly, not suddenly, but steadily, like dawn breaking across a quiet horizon. You begin to notice that the things which once triggered anxiety now stir faith. The things which once overwhelmed you now awaken courage. The things which once drove you to exhaustion now drive you to prayer. You realize that you are no longer reacting to life from a place of fear. You are responding to life from a place of trust. And this trust becomes your strength, not a fragile, temporary strength, but a deep, soul-forged strength that grows from knowing you are held, guided, and protected by the God of the universe. A strength that comes from surrender, a strength that comes from release, a strength that comes from saying, Lord, I trust you, I trust your plan, I trust your timing, I trust your promises. This is not the strength of self-reliance. This is the strength of divine dependence. Because the more you trust God, the more you discover that your life is not random. Your steps are ordered, your journey is intentional, your story is sacred. Everything you've walked through, everything you've survived, was shaping you into someone who doesn't crumble under pressure, someone who doesn't panic when things fall apart, someone who doesn't question God's goodness when life becomes difficult. This is the kind of spiritual resilience God, builds in those who surrender deeply. Look at David. Before he ever stood before Goliath, he stood before lions and bears. God was training him in secret long before he used him in public. The battles you fight alone are preparing you for the victories you will win in the open. Look at Moses. Before he ever parted the Red Sea, he wandered through a desert. God was stripping away his fear, his insecurity, his past, so he could raise up a leader who trusted him completely. Look at Gideon. Before he ever led an army, he was hiding in fear. God saw strength in him that he could not see in himself until trust awakened it. You are no different. God is developing something in you that pressure cannot destroy and fear cannot silence. He is shaping a strength within you that you didn't know you had. He is preparing you for battles you haven't yet fought and blessings you haven't yet received. But before he elevates you, he establishes you. Before he promotes you, he prepares you. Before he opens a door, he strengthens the one walking through it. This is why seasons of waiting matter. This is why seasons of silence matter. This is why seasons of pruning matter. This is why seasons of uncertainty matter, because these are the seasons where trust grows roots. And when trust has roots, storms cannot uproot you. Winds cannot sway you, doubt cannot shake you, fear cannot defeat you, because deep trust produces deep stability, a kind of spiritual backbone the world cannot bend. And this trust, this holy confidence, begins to transform the way you see the world. No longer do you see obstacles as evidence of God's absence. You see them as invitations to witness his power. No longer do you see delays as setbacks. You see them as divine scheduling. No longer do you see uncertainty as danger. You see it as the place where faith does its greatest work. You begin to walk through life differently, with shoulders relaxed, with breath steady, with heart open, with eyes lifted, because you know that nothing can come to you unless God allows it, and nothing can leave you unless God releases it. You know that what is meant for you cannot be taken, and what is not meant for you cannot be forced. You know that every good thing he has promised will come to pass in its perfect time, and you know that even in the darkest valley, you never walk alone. Trust becomes your anchor. Trust becomes your compass. Trust becomes your shield. Trust becomes your worship. Because trust is worship, it is the declaration that God is who he says he is, even when circumstances try to convince you otherwise. It is the declaration that you believe his promises more than your fears. It is the declaration that his voice carries more authority than your doubts. It is the declaration that you belong to him, and he will never fail you. And as this trust deepens, your relationship with God becomes more intimate, more alive, more real. You begin to see his fingerprints everywhere, in conversations, in opportunities, in quiet moments, in unexpected blessings, in the whispers of your heart. You begin to feel his nearness, not as a distant concept, but as a present reality. You begin to know him, not just as Creator, but as Father, not just as Lord, but as friend, not just as Savior, but as Sustainer. Your faith stops being theoretical. It becomes experiential. Your relationship with God stops being religious. It becomes relational. Your prayers stop being memorized. They become meaningful. Your worship stops being routine. It becomes revelation. This is the power of trust. It draws you closer to God than fear ever could. It softens your heart in ways anxiety never will. It strengthens your spirit in ways control never can. Trust is the bridge between where you are and where God is taking you. Trust is the doorway to peace. Trust is the pathway to purpose. Trust is the foundation of spiritual maturity. And as you continue walking in this unfolding trust, something inside you begins to shift, not dramatically at first, but profoundly, undeniably, like the slow carving of a canyon by a persistent river. The shift is subtle, yet transformative. You start waking up with a different posture. You begin carrying yourself with a quiet confidence that doesn't come from pride, but from presence, God's presence. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios and start expecting God to move. You stop living in reaction to fear and start living in anticipation of grace. It's as if your soul begins to stand taller. Because when trust settles into the bones, worry loses its authority, fear loses its grip, anxiety loses its voice. Suddenly, the mountains that once intimidated you now inspire you. The valleys that once terrified you now teach you. The unknown that once paralyzed you now invites you into deeper faith. This is the inner transformation God has been shaping within you, this sacred exchange of fear for trust, of panic for peace, of striving for surrender. But make no mistake, this transformation doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in the daily decision to release what you cannot control. It happens in the quiet choice to say, Lord, this is bigger than me, but not bigger than you. It happens when you lay down the burden you were never meant to carry and step into the freedom God intended all along. And that freedom, oh, how powerful it is. Because once you learn to trust God deeply, you begin to see your life through a divine lens. You begin to recognize that nothing is wasted, not your pain, not your failures, not your heartbreak, not your delays. Everything becomes part of a larger story God is writing, a story far more beautiful than anything you could ever orchestrate on your own. Look at Joseph, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, locked in a prison. If you looked at any one chapter of his life, you might assume God had abandoned him. But the truth was the opposite. God was positioning him, aligning him, preparing him. Every struggle was a step toward the palace. Every setback was shaping his purpose. And when the moment of destiny arrived, Joseph didn't say, "Look what I suffered." He said, God intended it for good. That's the voice of trust that sees beyond the moment into the meaning. Look at Abraham. God told him he would be the father of nations, yet his wife remained barren for decades. By every human measure, the promise seemed impossible. Yet Scripture says he did not waver through unbelief. Why? Because trust anchored him deeper than doubt ever could. Trust reminded him that God is not limited by circumstances, timelines, or human logic. Trust made him steadfast, and in the perfect fullness of time, the promise came. Look at Mary, a young girl, faced with a divine assignment she could not possibly understand, yet her response was simple. Let it be unto me according to your word. That's trust. Trust that doesn't need all the answers. Trust that doesn't demand clarity before surrender. Trust that says yes even when the path is unclear. And look at Jesus himself, kneeling in the Garden of Gethsemane, with the full weight of humanity pressing on his spirit. He prayed a prayer that echoed through all eternity. Not my will, but yours be done. That is the purest form of trust. Trust that transcends fear, trust that embraces purpose, trust that understands God's plan is always greater than our preference. When you trust like this, you begin to live differently. You begin to move through the world with a peace that others can't explain, a calmness that doesn't make sense, a strength that surprises even you. Because trust produces stability, and stability produces clarity, and clarity produces purpose. And that purpose begins to unfold with every step you take. Suddenly, the dreams that once felt impossible now feel inevitable, not because you are strong enough to make them happen, but because God is faithful enough to fulfill them. You walk not in your own power, but in God's promise. You speak not from fear, but from faith. You act not out of desperation, but out of divine direction. And you start to recognize the moments when God is leading you, not through thunder, not through earthquakes, not through dramatic signs, but through gentle nudges, quiet whispers, subtle openings. He begins to guide you in ways only your surrendered heart can discern. You feel him redirecting you when you're leaning towards something harmful. You sense him comforting you when your heart feels heavy. You hear him reminding you, "I'm here," when life feels overwhelming. This awareness becomes your anchor. Because trust doesn't eliminate difficulties, it redefines them. Trust doesn't erase storms, it steadies you within them. Trust doesn't guarantee a smooth path, it guarantees a guided one. God never promised you a life without challenges. He promised you his presence within every one of them. And this presence changes everything. When God is with you, valleys become training grounds, mountains become testimonies, delays become protection, detours become redirection, every chapter becomes meaningful, every moment becomes sacred. You look back on things that once broke you and realize they built you. You look back on prayers that were never answered and realize those were the ones that saved you. You look back on doors that closed and realize God was redirecting you to something far greater. This is what trust reveals. God's hand has always been upon you. God's plan has always been unfolding for you. God's grace has always been surrounding you. God's love has always been carrying you. And the more you recognize his hand in your story, the more your heart begins to rest, not in the absence of problems, but in the presence of his promise. Not in the certainty of outcomes, but in the certainty of his character. You begin to understand that trust is not merely believing God can do something. It is believing God will do what is right, what is wise, and what is ultimately for your good. This is why Scripture says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Because your understanding is limited. Your understanding is shaped by fear, by the pressure of the moment, by the weight of uncertainties. But God's understanding, it is infinite, perfect, complete. When you trust him fully, you release the urge to micromanage your life and surrender to the one who sees every twist and turn of your journey before you even take your next breath. And in that surrender, something beautiful happens. God begins to move in ways you never expected. Doors open that shouldn't have opened. People show up who were never on your radar. Opportunities emerge that you couldn't have planned if you tried. Peace settles into places where chaos used to live. Strength rises in areas where you once felt weak. Because when God works, he works beyond human limitations. When God moves, he moves in ways that defy logic. When God blesses, he blesses in a way that no man can steal. But he works best through surrendered hearts. Hearts that trust him enough to release control. Hearts that believe him enough to obey even when the path doesn't make sense. Think of Moses standing at the edge of the Red Sea. Behind him, an army determined to destroy him. Before him, an impossible barrier. No way forward, no way backward. By all accounts, he should have panicked. But Moses didn't rely on his own strength. He didn't rely on his own understanding. He trusted God. He lifted the staff God had placed in his hand, and heaven responded. Waters parted. A path appeared where no path had ever existed. That's what trust does. It creates a way where there is no way. Think of Daniel in the lion's den. The world expected his destruction. The king expected his demise. Even his enemies believed they had trapped him forever. But Daniel trusted God, and God shut the mouths of the lions. Trust turned danger into deliverance. Trust turned a death sentence into a testimony. Think of Noah building the ark when there was no rain. Think of Ruth stepping into fields where her future was still hidden. Think of David facing Goliath with nothing but a sling and a declaration of faith. Again and again, history shows that trust is not passive, it is powerful. Trust is not weakness, it is spiritual strength. Trust is not inactivity, it is alignment with heaven's strategy. And the same God who guided them, delivered them, rescued them, and raised them is guiding you, is delivering you, is rescuing you, is raising you. You may not see it yet. You may not understand it yet. You may not feel it yet. But trust does not require sight. Trust produces sight. Trust opens your eyes to the truth that God has already gone before you. And when you truly trust Him, you stop fighting battles that were never yours to fight. You stop worrying about outcomes that were never yours to control. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours to hold. Because trust whispers, God is working even here, even in the confusion, even in the waiting, even in the silence, even in the breaking, even in the places that don't look like promises yet. Trust is not built on what you see. Trust is built on who God is. And who is He? He is faithful. He is merciful. He is wise. He is powerful. He is loving. He is constant. He is protector. He is provider. He is peace, giver. He is burden, lifter. He is the author and finisher of your story. When you trust Him, you stop living like someone trying to survive, and you start living like someone destined to overcome. You begin walking with a posture of peace. You begin making decisions with clarity. You begin responding to challenges with strength. Because trust transforms you from the inside out. Worry collapses your spirit. Trust strengthens it. Fear paralyzes your steps. Trust empowers them. Anxiety fills your mind with noise. Trust fills it with truth. This is why Jesus said, "Do not worry about tomorrow." Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because tomorrow is already in God's hands. Worry doesn't prevent problems, it prevents peace. Worry doesn't prepare you, it drains you. Worry doesn't fix the situation, it fixes your mind on the wrong thing. Trust shifts your focus. Trust realigns your heart. Trust lifts your spirit. Trust brings God into the center of your circumstance. Because when God is at the center, everything changes. Your perspective changes. Your emotions change. Your decisions change. Your future changes. And slowly, day by day, you become someone who lives not by fear, but by faith. Not by stress, but by surrender. Not by control, but by confidence in the one who never fails. And as this faith matures, you begin to see life differently. Not just the big, obvious moments, but the ordinary, mundane, and often overlooked details of your daily existence. Every decision, every interaction, every circumstance becomes an opportunity to exercise trust. Trust is no longer just a feeling reserved for moments of crisis. It becomes a way of life. It colors the way you wake up in the morning, the way you respond to setbacks, the way you speak, the way you act, the way you breathe. Every aspect of your existence becomes infused with the quiet confidence that God is working, even when you cannot see it. This is the power of letting God handle it. You begin to recognize the subtle ways He moves in your favor, the doors that open just at the right moment, the people He places along your path to guide or encourage you, the seemingly small opportunities that turn into life, changing moments. You realize that what you once considered coincidences were actually divine appointments. That what you once feared as failures were actually divine lessons. That what you once mourned as losses were actually preparations for blessings. And the moment you start to see life this way, worry loses its grip, anxiety loses its power, doubt fades into the background, because you realize for the first time, perhaps, that you are not alone in your struggles. You are not powerless against life's challenges. You are not abandoned in the storms. The creator of the universe, the one who spoke galaxies into existence, the one who controls the rise and fall of nations, is walking with you, carrying you, guiding you, protecting you every step of the way. You see, God doesn't just want to help you survive. He wants to help you thrive. He doesn't just want to shield you from pain. He wants to transform your pain into power. He doesn't just want to give you solutions. He wants to give you growth, character, and a story that inspires others. And this is where trust becomes revolutionary. Because when you truly let go and let God, everything in your life begins to change, not necessarily because circumstances shift immediately, but because you shift. Your perspective changes, your heart changes, your courage awakens, your resilience strengthens, your peace rises, your joy returns. You begin to understand that life is not about controlling outcomes, but about cultivating faith. That the measure of your success is not in how little you struggle, but in how much you trust God in the struggle. That your power does not come from what you can accomplish on your own, but from what God can accomplish through you when you surrender. Consider the story of Peter walking on the water. The waves were chaotic. The storm raged around him. Fear could have easily drowned him. But in the moment he fixed his eyes on Jesus, trust became action, and the impossible became possible. When you step out in trust, God meets you there in your weakness, in your uncertainty, in your hesitation, and turns it into a testimony. Trust is not passive. Trust is not waiting idly while life passes you by. Trust is active surrender. Trust is choosing to obey God even when you don't understand the outcome. Trust is courage in the face of the unknown. Trust is peace amid chaos. Trust is faith that transcends fear. And as you live in this trust, your life begins to reflect the reality of God's promises. The burdens that once crushed you now refine you. The storms that once shook you now strengthen you. The pain that once broke you now shapes you. The uncertainties that once terrified you now teach you reliance on God's unshakable power. This is not a fleeting feeling of comfort. This is the deep, abiding, unshakable peace that comes when your heart rests fully in God's hands. This is the confidence that rises when you no longer rely on your own understanding, but on His wisdom. This is the transformation that occurs when you stop trying to fix everything and start letting God handle it fully, completely, powerfully. And in this surrender, your faith becomes contagious, your hope becomes visible, your joy becomes undeniable. Others begin to see the difference in you, a calm in the storm, a light in the darkness, a strength that cannot be manufactured by human effort. And slowly, gradually, The ripple effect of your trust touches everyone around you. Trust transforms not just your life, but your relationships, your influence, your impact, and your purpose. When you live in the reality of God's faithfulness, you stop living for approval, for recognition, for temporary satisfaction. You live for the eternal, for the kingdom, for what truly matters. You step into the destiny you were created for, a destiny of faith, hope, love, and unstoppable purpose.